So today I was hoping we could talk about Blur.
Yeah.
I know you have two photo shoots with them, and maybe we could begin in 1993 with
Yeah,
the
so
first one.
back then I was working for a very colourful, kind of iconic 90s magazine called Select. And I used to play a lot of snooker down at Union Street in Plymouth when I was at college there. And in fact, the first year, after the first year passed of my ordinary national diploma, I got a letter from the college saying that I'd been in college so little that they were going to kick me off the course. And it was only in the second year that I sort of fell in love with the medium and started being competitive with the other people on the course and improved a little bit. But one thing I did get very good at in the first year was playing snooker. And with regard to that, I think the picture editor at Select thought it would be a good idea to get me as the photographer in a Select staff versus Blur pool competition. So we convened in a sort of sleazy late night sort of snooker hall, and there were some pool tables,
So,
and it was
how,
like lambs to the slaughter.
oh, so you guys won.
Yeah, because I mean, basically, if you can play snooker on a 6 by 12 proper snooker table, then pool is very, very easy. And
Okay. Oh, so you weren't playing, you were playing pool with them.
we were playing pool with them,
Yeah.
and they were very competitive and
Interesting.
not particularly happy about losing. But we gave them a good
And so
thrashing.
the idea was to get pictures during the game
Yeah,
of pool.
yeah, that's
Okay.
right. And so what I elected to do was I used a very unusual, sort of an esoteric film called Scotch. I think it was 640 ASA tungsten slide film. And I used the available light from the overhead lighting for the pool table, and just the available light that was in there. And I was surprised at how well the pictures came out. They're quite grainy, but they have a really nice atmosphere about them. And
They're quite warm.
yeah, they are. I think it would be interesting to sort of do an edition, because they are a moment in time and they kind of feel very authentic.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, who was the best player in the band? Could you
I
remember?
think probably Damon is
Damon.
the most competitive
All
and
right.
the alpha male in the
The
band
main
for
singer,
sure.
lead singer, yeah.
Yeah, although, everyone fancies themselves as good, but they were thrashed
Okay.
by me and Steve Reed, who was the picture editor. He was
Okay,
also
well,
quite good at pool. We used to play pool.
we'll have Steve Reed's information up and
Yeah,
also the pictures.
and my name after this was Harry the Gold. They used to call me Harry the Gold because I was using Kodacolor gold sometimes
Oh, okay.
and then cross-processing it, but also it was kind of a moniker that alluded to my kind of style and panache on the billiard table.
Cool, that's great. That's a great story.
I photographed like the chalk on the side of the table, and then I sort of put the camera on a tripod and I did a long exposure and had all the balls sort of being slightly blurred and stuff, and popped a little bit of flash in there, I think. But it turned out very well. I was using an autofocus Nikon SLR. I wasn't using a medium format camera. And it was at a time that was quite hedonistic at Select. And so it was a precursor to Loaded in a way, where it was just as important to have a good time as, bring home the bacon photographically.
It would have been fun commissions then, I can
Yeah,
imagine.
it was.
So how old were you at this moment?
Well, it was in 93, so I would have been about 27.
Okay, so it's quite young. So this was still quite early in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. But I was sort of getting quite confident, and by that stage, I'd sort of established myself as one of the photographers at Select.
And yeah, and you also mentioned there was lots of champagne on your
That's right.
Instagram pictures.
Yeah, I
So
looking at the pictures, I think one of the features editors thought it would be a good idea to bring loads of champagne, and so we got them a bit drunk as well, which made it even easier to
or even
beat
more
them.
competitive, a
Yeah.
bit more rowdy. Cool.
Yeah, it got quite rowdy. I don't really remember how the evening ended, and it does feel strange that, and quite strangely amateurish and stupid that I didn't get anything on medium format, or at least seize the opportunity to take other types of pictures. But
especially in that era, I feel like you were using predominantly.
Absolutely, it
medium
was a
format.
real kind of little a sort of a side. You know, I sort of went off into a little creative cul-de-sac that I've never been to since or before.
But it looks great. I think, yeah, I'm surprised you didn't do it more often. So, Dad, by the sounds of it, it sounds as if it was very reportage. You didn't come with any sort of plans, and you kind of just spent the time photographing moments, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of smoking, a lot of drinking. It was all quite kind of chaotic and difficult, but I kind of went with the flow, and it's very much a record of what happened on the night and me observing it rather than me controlling it. I just had to sort of pick out these little moments. And actually, when you do that sometimes, when you don't get too involved, you end up getting something more interesting and more authentic. And there's one picture of Damon, which I think is a really strong picture, where he's sort of looking at me in a certain way, and it has this kind of power to it. And it's very different to a picture you take in a studio, because he's in an environment that you might expect him to be in. You know, he's in the pub, you know, yeah. A kind of geezer.
Cool. And you also mentioned there was you had a bit of difficulty. You thought you had a really strong picture, but maybe it was ruined, or...
Oh yeah, I was sort of trying to get a picture of the four of them in a line behind the table, you know, rather than individually playing their shots. I wanted an establishing shot, and you know, they were just being drunk and difficult, and I think they were all posing in different ways, but at the end, Damon sort of stood up and his head is just completely obscured by the light, you know. So the most important and kind of obvious element of blur is missing.
Yeah.
So it was pointless.
I'm sure it's quite a fun photo. We'll have it up.
Yeah.
How big were Blur at the time?
They were getting there.
Okay.
You know, they were kind of one of a number of bands. I think the term that they used at the time was shoegazers. They were kind of, you know, in amongst a lot of other bands. They were getting a lot of attention because they were very photogenic, particularly Damon. He was sort of preternaturally beautiful. You know, he's a very handsome guy. And so that he kind of got the attention of the pop mags as well as the sort of indie magazines. And so they were kind of, they hadn't yet kind of become a really big band, but they were sort of on the road and heading in that direction.
How many years later was it until the second shoot?
Well, it was the following year.
Oh.
And I remember it really well because we convened at the studio just north of the King's Road in Beaufort Street, and it was later converted into a big Terence Conran restaurant called Bluebird. I think maybe called Bluebird Studios. And I remember during the session, the PR, or not the PR, the record company people brought in a chromalin, which is a kind of an approximation of how the artwork will look when printed for their forthcoming album, which was Park Life, which had that extraordinary picture of a greyhound going around the track.
Right. And
we were all looking at it and marveling over what a startling kind of cover for an LP. Okay. So, and that album really took them into another world, you know, elevated them hugely.
Yeah, for sure.
I think by this time they were even more kind of difficult and truculent and difficult to work with, you know, kind of bored of being on this conveyor belt of having to do interviews and so on. And so what happened was, you know, I stupidly brought my brother along, you know.
Talented artist in his own right.
Yeah, but present company accepted, it's not necessarily a good idea to employ, or not that you're employed by me, but employ, I mean, actually you've been assisting, haven't you?
Yeah, but, I've been assisting you.
But my brother was not a good choice as an assistant.
He's quite an enigma.
Yeah, he didn't really care about photography, didn't really want to learn anything about my practice. He did it for the money, which is fair enough. And within a few minutes, he was starting to get really pissed off because I remember Damon was sort of asking him if he would make him a cup of tea. And
Which I don't think is too crazy of a
yeah.
request.
I remember at one point my brother said, if he asked me to make him a cup of tea again, I'm going to hit him. So, yeah, no, it was a bad move. Nick and I, you know, back then we were just up in London and, you know, we were kind of like, you know, a bit rough around the edges, you know, country boys and stuff like that. And, you know, I think we sort of felt that they needed to be brought down a peg or two, really.
So you agreed with Nick?
Well, I kind of was sympathetic because they were pretty annoying. If anyone's interested, Nick's actually got an exhibition at the moment, so we'll put it up on screen.
Before we go into like the photography aspect of stuff, just quickly, did they remember you? Did they remember your game, your thrashing?
I'm not sure if they did remember me. I think they were kind of... They probably had a vague recollection of being thrashed by me. But I think that, you know, they were kind of at war with the world. They were kind of hunkered down the way bands do and in their own kind of little cocoon, difficult to control. You know, again, similar to the pool table, but at least there wasn't sort of champagne added into the mix.
Yeah,
and
bad
so,
idea.
yeah, each of them had their own sort of, you know, idiosyncrasies. So the drummer, Dave Rowntree, he seemed quite nice. Alex, the cheese guy, he makes cheese now. He's a farmer. I found him quite annoying. I think he's sort of actually probably burdened in a way by, in the way that very handsome people quite often don't have to develop a personality or don't have to be nice because they're very pretty and easy on the eye. So he was sort of slightly annoying. And Damon is probably a bit of a bully. And he kind of just had a kind of obstreperous, kind of
impression?
Bellicose interaction with everyone. He's just surly and difficult to kind of work with. But, you know, his edginess and kind of intensity and sort of, you know, hostility made for good pictures. The magazine had a really peculiar kind of conceit that they were kind of trying to do, which I think was a huge mistake, and they didn't, thankfully, put it into practice. But they asked me to photograph them all in a very bland way, and it was just at the advent of digital retouching. And their intention, given that Blur were at the time, you know, representative of a sort of modern, multicultural Britain, was to sort of photograph all four members of Blur and then retouch them as a different, I mean, you'd never do this now, as a different sort of ethnic heritage. So one of them would be black, and then one of them would be Asian, and so on and so forth. Really bizarre and a really strange idea, which I wasn't really very happy with. I mean, it's effectively blackface.
Yeah.
So they didn't do that. But that's the reason why my pictures, I shot them on colour transparency on my Hasselblad. They're quite bland and they're quite straightforward. But I think they're quite nice as a result.
That one particular picture you have of them against the wall on the outside, I have it, and with the pole in the middle.
Yeah, so that was taken at the end of the shoot.
Right.
So we did all these shoots in the studio, the bland pictures that they were going to retouch.
Grey background.
Yeah. After we finished those, I thought, well, I'm going to do something for myself. So I took them outside into Beaufort Street and we walked towards the river. And just before we got to the river, on the left was a sort of Victorian tenement block. And there was this weird shed in the area sort of next to it. And it said wet paint written on the floor in chalk.
I see it.
And I got them in position, and there was an annoying sort of pole that was sort of obscuring my my photograph, but I kind of decided to go with it and actually include it into the composition. And it sort of divides the band up in an interesting way, because you've got the two most talented, or seemingly most talented members of the band, Damon and Graham Coxon on one side, the guitarist, and then on the other side, you've got the drummer and the bassist, the sort of rhythm section and the kind of maybe less glamorous
Okay.
members of the band.
And you mentioned something, it's a great photo, by the way. You mentioned something about each of them except Graham.
Oh, well, Graham, actually, I can tell you a good story. The reason I wear these glasses is Graham Coxon.
Oh, interesting.
So,
Is he wearing the same ones in this photo?
yeah, well, he's wearing sort of national
Similar.
health glasses.
Okay.
I was to shoot him in 2000. So
7 years later.
several years later, just solo. He went solo, and I was photographing him, and I think it was probably for Q magazine. And I liked him. I think he's the most cool in a way, as is often the case. The guitarist is sometimes the coolest because the singers thinks they're the most cool, but they're kind of vainglorious and kind of conceited. Whereas the guitarist, you know, like Johnny Marr, although I must say I'm a fan of the Smiths, and I'd love to photograph Morrissey. He's the only one of the Smiths I've not photographed. But basically, when I was photographing Graham, we hung out in Camden, which is where he lives, and I sort of said to him, you know, how come you wear those glasses, you know? And he said he went to an old chemist, and they had all these old National Health spectacles, and he bought them, and he puts lenses into them.
Oh.
And you know, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
There you go.
So I made that my brand, and I copied him. You know,
YouTube, yeah.
never, you know, I'd never say I'm as cool as Graham Coxon, but it's a good strong look, you know. And so I started buying vintage glasses from car boot sales and putting lenses in them.
It's just another accessory.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, the shoot, we'll put some pictures of the Graham Coxon shoot because it's quite an interesting example.
Is there a particular image you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, there's one picture I took, we'll show the contacts, where I think maybe somebody had got a motorbike or a car and they'd set it on fire, and it had burnt all the paint on this wall. So there was a circle of this flaking paint.
Right.
Or maybe they just tipped a load of paint stripper at this particular point. But it's the kind of thing I look for, a ready-made, something that you couldn't even get a set builder to create. And quite often you can, you know, you can have all these preconceived ideas, or these notions, all these things that you're going to try on the day. And then if you're aware and you keep your eyes open, sometimes something much better will just fall in your lap.
You could say the same about the second shoot, but the main image you took from the
black and white picture.
The black and white one with the pole in the middle. You're not going to get a set builder to build that.
Yeah.
You're not going to get that in a studio.
No, absolutely. And so with the Graham Coxon, there's a shot of him against this wall that works quite well. There's also I was starting to use more reportage type pictures in amongst my celebrities, sort of my medium format traditional celebrity portraiture. And I had my Leica, I think, or it might have been the Nikon, but we were just walking around and hanging out, and he's smoking a cigarette, and there's one frame that I really like where he's walking along that works really well.
Well, maybe a separate video on him would be good.
Maybe. Well, let's see what whether people like this one.
Yeah, of course, of course. Cool.
We're ever mindful of the audience.
Yeah. So have you told Nick you've done a thing on Blur?
Well, I did.
We're doing a video on Blur.
Well, at the end of the shoot that we did on 35mm, I saw a couple of frames because the band just left us by this sort of lean-to and went back to the studio, and so I obviously used them up on him, and so I couldn't resist getting one of the pictures and WhatsApping it to him, and he sort of immediately knew that it was. He said something along the lines of, "Is that from that notorious Blur shoot of '94?" And then I explained. I remember.
I'll put it up on screen, the message, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and I told him. I said to him, "Do you remember that you wanted to punch Damon?" And he confirmed that they were quite rude.
Cool. Yeah, we'll have that on screen.